Thank you all for coming. The title of my talk is The Clerical God. I first met the clerical God in 1964. This was at Springwood, at the foot of the Blue Mountains. He was not to my liking. The clerical God lived somewhere in space, aloof and cold, judgmental and petty, male and misogynist. This clerical God sought my love to the exclusion of all other loves. A selfish God. I demonstrated my love for him by obeying rules devised by his institutional leaders. As it happened, I had a loving relationship with a different God. And you can read about that God in Trapped, and you've got a sense of that God from listening to what Anne said just a moment ago. In my medieval seminary, hiding away from the world that I loved, I learnt to compare unfavourably all philosophical thinking from the time of the early Greeks to the most modern thinkers with the thoughts of St. Thomas Aquinas. Thomas, however, was somewhat out of date. He died in 1274. But this medievalism was part of a pattern. Our seminary took its nature and shape from the Council of Trent, 1563, with updates from two popes who shut out the world by locking themselves within the Vatican. The second of these popes, St. Pius X, greatly feared the world. Pius had visions of the Antichrist whenever he looked out beyond the walls of the Vatican. He died in 1910. As I say in my book, the clerical leadership of the church was at war with the modern world, and I was learning to be a foot soldier. 10 years older than most other seminarians, I found myself torn between two religious missions. The first was the clerical otherworldly mission, saving souls for heaven. The second was an earthly mission, creating the kingdom of God based on justice and love that I had worked at as a teenager in the Young Christian Workers Movement, the YCW. A naive and idealistic country youth, I took from my YCW experience the notion that God permeated the whole of creation and that the secular and the sacred were one. The clerical misogynist seminary system was in my time anti-life, anti-human, and anti-Christian. Specifically chosen by God, spiritually transformed into superior beings on ordination. We seminarians needed no one but the clerical God and his divine institution. We were trained for narcissism. Many of us were slowly drained of whatever empathy we brought with us. There was a psychological sickness at the heart of seminary training. A metaphor I use in my book is that of a lighthouse. We were training to be lighthouses, shining a light for others from the edge of a world in which we never truly belonged. The sheer joy of being alive, of being called to share in the life of Christ, of being called to love, of striving to reach our fullest potential as persons, of growing to be responsible and independent people, of feeling part of a community. There was none of that. We were not encouraged to work together or to share our doubts and love. We were never encouraged to look for the Creator in his creation, to celebrate the wild beauty of the Australian bush and its mysterious and profound indifference. Instead, we lived in a cloud of suspicion. We dare not touch one another, enter another's room, or walk in pairs. We were forbidden to speak to the 9 women who cooked, washed, and cleaned for us. Filled with a terrible fear of sex, the authorities operated their total institution as if at any moment an insane and sinful outbreak of homosexual sex would break out. It's easy enough to criticise the seminary system, and others have done it better than me. Dr. Michael Whelan, Catholic priest of the Society of Mary, was a witness before the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse. Michael was questioned about seminary training. In a memorable reply, he said, "I think we should change. How can I say this? Get rid of seminaries." In my total institution, every moment of our day was planned for us, moulded and shaped into the mind of the church. We were disciplined for loyalty and obedience. Recent research into the causes of child sexual abuse in the church makes clear that our formation was too narrowly focused. Too focused on the head and not the heart. Intellectual and theological training was emphasised at the expense of our human development, emotional and social, spiritual and pastoral. Our formation was too concerned with external behaviour and appearances, too little on interior growth. Celibacy was rarely, if ever, mentioned. I have an important question for you. If you read my book, you should keep this question in mind. To what extent was the failure of the seminary system and the culture of the Catholic Church in general a significant cause of the sexual abuse scandal? I argue that they were. I was led to this conclusion for at least two reasons. The first was that the seminary system in the Western world produced too many psychosexually immature young men. Many of these young men had joined all-male seminaries from all-male boarding schools. Sexual maturity is a process. Most of us work through it in our teenage days, in the mad hustle and bustle of raging hormones. I may be speaking of myself here. I'm not sure about the rest of you. Too many young priests entered the world as adult children, vulnerable at any time, but especially to the new sexual mores of the 1960s. Frustrated and ignorant of their own sexuality, unable to form mature adult relationships, too many were ill-equipped to cope with their mandatory celibacy. Too many felt comfortable with children. The second reason why church culture and the seminary system are linked to child sexual abuse is the overwhelming evidence that the Catholic clergy had more child sexual abuse allegations made against them than clergy in other faith communities. Recent statistics from the Des Carl Peter Wilkinson RMIT report, which came too late for me to include in my book, confirm my argument. We are not dealing here with a few bad apples. There has to be a systemic problem. Further, how else can the almost universal response of bishops to protect their priests rather than innocent children? Cardinal George Pell told the Royal Commission that the cause of sexual abuse in the Church was original sin. As we are all born in original sin, this throws the problem back on weak individuals. Personal faults, personal failures, rather than structures, Pell told the commissioners. Such an argument completely exonerates the institution. Pope St. John Paul II, who died in 2005, said much the same as Pell. The Pope thought that the causal reason for child sexual abuse was the work of Satan in the world. The Catholic Church is a very human organisation. Supernatural arguments of this kind leave human responsibility with nowhere to go. These men are blind to the problems that exist in the Church. And in my book, I reject such arguments. So I wish to conclude with a number of bold statements for you to consider. 1. The institutional church is in crisis and has lost credibility. 2. The institutional clerical church is incapable of saving itself. 3. The institutional clerical church will be saved by its critics. 4. New transparent protocols protecting children in church institutions are nothing more than what a civilised community would expect. 5. Catholic laymen and women must reject their subservient role, must reject notions of divine structures and seek and secure senior executive positions within the institution. 6. The essential problems of the church are theological. In particular, the mistaken theology of the body and sexuality which frames its ethics. 7. Beliefs and values determine structures. 8. The presence of God in the contemporary world will be made visible by those working to create a just society that takes into account the whole of creation. And 9, the institutional church must find a different God. Thank you.